I'm not all those things for the Commission, but very proud to be here as one of the 12 Commissioners on the Victorian Multicultural Commission. Thank you, Stephanie. It's great to follow on from Angela. I just realised we've got a lot in common when it comes to sport. That includes height and talent. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land we gather on and pay my respects to their elders both past and present. I also want to acknowledge Kimon Taldros, President of the Football Federation of Victoria. To you and your team, congratulations on putting this together. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the Victorian Multicultural Commission. Helen Kaplos, Chairperson of the Victorian Multicultural Commission, sends on her warmest and best regards and hoping that this event has proven to be and will continue to be an enlightening and informative one. Look, in addition to my work on the VMC, I am the Managing Director of a consulting company, Activate Global, but prior to that I was also as the Head of Community Engagement and Secretary of the Diversity Council at Cricket Australia. Thankfully, but surely, sport and the landscape is changing, as Angela alluded to. It's fair to say commitments are being made at every level across all the sporting codes to increase female participation and empower women to feel safe to participate in sport. And that's why today I'm privileged to be here among so many people who share that passion about increasing female and multicultural participation. And I'll say from the onset that my presentation is primarily focused on those of you who are involved at the grassroots, with some practical tips and experiences that I've been able to gather over the years as a sports administrator. The VMC, the Victorian Multicultural Commission, is very aware that there is a clear intersect between gender and cultural diversity, something that we can't forget or view in isolation, and that women from culturally diverse backgrounds often face additional hurdles to community participation in a variety of areas. This can come from within communities in the form of expected gender roles, if you like, as caregivers, as mothers, etc., and externally in the form of discrimination and harassment on the basis of race and religion. I'm sure many of you would be familiar with people who've had those experiences. Today I'll speak about how we can make sport more inclusive for our culturally diverse communities, women and men. And one thing I'd like you to take away from today is that particularly women from culturally diverse backgrounds face barriers that are magnified by comparison to others. Look, I wanted to start with a personal story and in an effort to highlight the power of sport. Can I take you some 20 years ago when my parents arrived to Australia as refugees from Iraq. And during that time, we spent 8 months in Villawood, and my first exposure to sport was watching Tamil detainees play cricket. And then following being granted permanent residency and Australian, if you like, citizenship, we were able to enter into the community. And for me, it was mainly playing cricket, as well as other sports, such as soccer and rugby league. I recently had a taxi driver when I recounted the number of sports I was involved in. He said, you're talented. I said, no, I'm multifaceted. There's no talent there. But the point is, for me at that point in time, learning the English language helped me learn about Australian society. But you see, sport made me part of Australian society. And so the power of sport cannot be understated. And in my view, all of us who are involved in sport have an obligation to share the joys and benefits of sport. And for those who are particularly in paid administrator gigs, the reality is the business of sport is about using the power of sport to transform communities and people. And we must deliver on that. That's our obligation. In terms of diversity, we often hear diversity and inclusion, if you like, grouped together. Can I say that the reality is that diversity is a matter of fact, particularly for us as a society? You know, if you look at the recent census, 28.5% of Australians were born overseas. Almost 50% of Australians have a parent born overseas. Over 260 languages are spoken. Almost 20% of Australians have a form of disability, and just over half of our population is female. Diversity is a matter of fact when it comes to our broader community. The challenge for any organisation and any group of people is to make sure that the diversity within that group is proportionate to the population, that there is proportionate representation. Clearly, if 90% of your sport, like cricket is in terms of club, is male-dominated, clearly that's not a proportionate representation of the community. But more often than not, diversity in one form or another is a matter of fact, and the challenge for us is just to maintain proportionate balance and representation. However, inclusion is not universal. This photo may not look as though it's a direct link to a sports policy, but it initiated a conversation that led to a $4 million initiative, the Multicultural Sports Fund Grant. Now, in southern Sudan, family is the most important building agent, and its value is immense. The bigger the family, the better. Culturally, families nurture and support one another in a potent way. These mothers wanted their children to belong, but this one family, the mothers told us that with each child's football fees, soccer registration costing up to $400 per year, membership and access was not always possible for each child in the family. And really, as beneficiaries of sport, our obligation is to ensure people like this family have the access and experience the benefits that come with sport. Too many of our fellow Australians miss out because of either gender, race, or other circumstances. And so that really drove the Multicultural Sports Fund, which has brought already together several sporting codes to make sure that their sports are more inclusive. I'll go into more detail about the fund soon, but first I'd like to talk about the other barriers that are there to accessing sport. In my view, in being involved in the sports administration for about 10 years, there are 4 strong barriers that are getting in the way of most people in participating at a community level, but particularly those from culturally and linguistically diverse background. The first is awareness, the level of knowledge in relation to the sport. How aware are they of the opportunities that exist to participate? And some communities are not familiar with football or cricket, for that matter of fact, whatever it may be. I know it's hard to believe, particularly in football's case, but there are communities who don't have that level of awareness. The other, and this is a major issue for all the sports, particularly for women, is one of perception, about whether they have a role and a place in the sport, whether the sport is safe and inclusive, whether it's dominated by one particular subgroup and therefore they may not feel it's a comfortable environment for them to be involved in. It's also about being, I guess in a sense, certain sports like cricket, for example, there's a perception that it's a colonial sport and that it's not a sport necessarily for Asian migrants and other groups of people. Football has its own perception issues. I'm sure you're familiar with them. You don't need me to recount those to you. And that's the battle. That's an important and critical barrier. There's also the one about knowledge and being familiar with sporting clubs. Most of our culturally and linguistically diverse communities don't necessarily come from an environment where they've been exposed to structural sporting involvement. Where for all of us who have existed here for generations, the sport is part of who we are. We're familiar, we are aware of the sporting structures and pathways that we can get involved in. And last but not least, this is really a barrier, as I said, for many people wanting to be involved in sport. It's about access, time, cost, transport. It's particularly exacerbated for multicultural communities and those who've recently arrived. They're the 4 main barriers. I'm sure there'll be others that you come across. Now, what's important is that those barriers are addressed. And whilst I was at Cricket Australia, we built a program called the Sport for All Diversity and Inclusion Training Program. And in addition to addressing the barriers and the issues, if you like, or the obstacles, we wanted to empower volunteers and grassroots organisations with, I guess, tips and tools that they can employ at a local level to increase participation, to become more inclusive. And if I was to recommend the 6 steps, these would be the 6 steps for greater inclusion. The first of which is look inwards, educate and create a welcoming environment. How inclusive are your facilities? How accessible are they? Have you appointed people in place, for example, to be a welcoming officer, the person who will set the first impressions for those coming through the door? Have you built, the second step is one of building understanding and competence in leaders. I understand everyone involved is largely on a volunteer basis. But it's important to even just have simple conversations about the different people that could be coming through the door and making sure that their cultural background is understood, who they are and their preferences. Know your local community. How well do you know your local community and the links that you can establish? You know, you can't exist and be part of the community without forming those relationships and partnerships, which leads to the 4th point. Look outwards, partner and communicate. Actively engage those within your community, multicultural organisations, etc., etc. First engagement. Everyone knows first impressions are often the lasting impressions. When somebody walks through to your club, does it make them feel like they belong? Are there, for example, it's very simple, but are there, for example, as many posters of women as there are of men? You know, we are, in cricket, that's a big issue. Because of the male domination of the game, you often see that presence. You need to make sure that that presence leaves people with an impression that you're an inclusive sporting organisation. Retain and champion. It's no use just getting people through the door. We've got to keep them involved in lifelong sporting participation. And so that's really about the quality of experience. Are you coaching, providing inclusive environments and coaching methods so that people feel like they belong? And also champion. Make sure that everyone in your club is a champion of inclusion and that everyone is made to feel welcome in whatever environment you are responsible for. Which is why, putting all of that in context, which is why we at the Victorian Multicultural Commission were keen to establish the Multicultural Sports Fund to empower sporting organisations, particularly those at the grassroots, to be able to employ and deploy some of those tips that I mentioned. This is an exciting program that will see successful applicants partner with local communities and sporting clubs in disadvantaged areas to develop, plan and implement activities that will increase access to and participation for those from culturally diverse communities. The Victorian Multicultural Commission hopes that the program will increase social inclusion and build strong and lasting connections between culturally diverse communities and the wider Victorian community. Hopefully it will also enable culturally diverse communities, including young people and women, to better access and participate in sporting activities. And last but not least, also support the Victorian sports sector to better understand, reach and positively engage with culturally diverse communities, as well as improve the mental health and well-being of culturally diverse communities. This is a big issue, particularly for recently arrived migrants. So we're very proud to be able to partner with FFV. The Football Federation of Victoria successfully applied for this program. The funding will see the Federation work collaboratively with the Hyundai A-League and Westfield W-League clubs, Melbourne City Football Club and the Melbourne Victory Football Club to provide refugees and asylum seekers in particular who aspire to be players, coaches and referees with greater access to local football communities. Local football communities, many of you here, will be encouraged to build, create and maintain inclusive football environments. That first step that I spoke about as being the key to inclusion. Participation programs and interpersonal and football training. And the success of leadership and skills programs by Melbourne City Football Club and the Melbourne Victory Football Club will be leveraged and delivered specifically for refugee and asylum seeker communities. Football Federation of Victoria will also provide links to sustainable and inclusive club programs, competitions and access to volunteering and potentially paid employment opportunities. It really is a passport to social mobility for many of our new and recently arrived migrants. Underpinning the initiatives led by the A-League clubs, there will be sustainable links to Football Federation Victoria National Premier League Victoria clubs and their community programs, community clubs and associations, the heartbeat of any sporting code in this country. This includes providing more access to social and modified football, summer sevens, winter competitions and Football Federation Australia's Mini-Roos program. I'm told that Football Federation Australia is also adopting the Mini-Roos program to focus more on multicultural communities, particularly in Western Sydney. And recently, and congratulations to Emma and the rest of the team, on establishing a multicultural unit and participation program. This will help increase engagement with multicultural communities from across Australia and will build on the other naturally inclusive nature of the sport itself. The A-League, for example, represents an extraordinary diverse player base, unlike any other sporting competition in Australia. I've always said to people in cricket and AFL that football, when it comes to being inclusive and diversity, is really at the pinnacle of those efforts. The league is wonderfully reflective of our society and shows that sport can be unifying for both spectators and participants. In addition to this, our multicultural communities tell us that they want to see real representation of Victoria's diversity. They want to see themselves and their lives reflected, and we can't do enough of that. And one of the great things about the A-League is that it provides both of these things. We at the VMC look forward to the Federation's Female Football Week next March, another great initiative by Emma and her team, a real celebration and reflection of the growth of women's football in Australia. For all of this work, the Victorian Multicultural Commission thanks and congratulates Football Federation of Victoria and the Football Federation of Australia. Look, I don't need to tell you this, but this is another fact. 240 million people in over 200 countries play football every day. Football is truly the world game, and it's got such great reach and is a common passion for many newly arrived migrants. That's why football is at the forefront of the efforts to engage our recently arrived migrants, and best placed to do so, if I may add so. So it's wonderful to see your organisations, right from the grassroots through to FFA and FFV, tapping into the unifying potential of your game. Thanks once again for including me in this important presentation.
Thank you very much indeed, Sam. Sorry, I'll say it's a VMC Commissioner. If you want to be the Managing Director today, you can be the Managing Director. Folks, joining Sam up on the panel, would you please now welcome VU Student Engagement Coordinator, Asha Reech. And the President of Hoppers Crossing Soccer Club, Steve Lambrakakis. Was it close? Hey, my media career started at SBS. If I can't pronounce a surname, there's something wrong. It taught me nothing. Asha, can I come to you first and ask what is your involvement with women in the South Sudanese community?
Pretty much first up, because I'm growing up as a little girl, we always wanted to play football, and let you know that I actually came here at the age of 8. So I'll just paint a quick little picture for you. Living in a small village back in Kenya. It's a small town where a lot of the refugees kind of congregate together, and that's where everybody find their ways travelling overseas. And during the World Cup period, our house, we had a little tiny radio throughout the whole area, and during football period, everybody came in just to listen to the game. So as a little girl, I think we all lived and breathed football, whether you're a man and a woman. And coming to Australia, I originally wanted to play soccer, and I watched my first Matildas game, and I was like, oh, I want to play one day. So, but then again, being a girl and being like from an African descent, being in sport, I was seeing like I had no future there. So what we recently started doing, and we started organising small little women's teams, and was just playing off either just women's or girls against boys, boys against girls, or we just played mixed games. And that's basically how I came about to meeting JP.
Do you feel differently now about the opportunities?
Yeah, way more. To think about it, considering my family, because my dad's one of the dinosaurs, my dad, he's very headstrong. And coming from a big family as well, and I've got 4 brothers and there's 2 girls. And we always watched on the weekend the boys going off to do sport and us girls staying at home, because for a girl, we didn't have any opportunity in sport. And then, you know, after just seeing that through, it kind of started to settle in and be like, okay, well, I guess there's no future in sport for me. As you can see, I can't travel or go out or participate in sport. But what I've started to do is like, okay, then I've searched other pathways and gone through other careers, but still my passion in sport is still there. And I'm like, okay, if I can't be a part of it, how can I help the younger ones make sure that they get the opportunity that I missed out on? Yeah.
And how has, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
How has sport helped you in the planning of activities for the South Sudanese community, and what perhaps could it do more of to help?
Sporting for us, I could probably say sporting is at the top of everything. So if it's in running, football mostly. So when it comes to organising events, especially when it's a football gaming event, the whole community is more likely to show up than doing a musical down. So we have 2 things that are the mace most important things for us that get our whole community together is football and dancing. Those two work together like glue. And
sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah. Oh God, you have no idea.
Is that an invite coming?
Oh, you better believe it.
Bring the food.
I got the grounds.
Of course. And most recently, what we did, we in August, we recently had a quick small tournament, and it was basically first boys and girls tournament where we had a little kick-off with the Victorian police. And that, for us, we saw there was an opportunity there and was like, okay, then I think football and in sport as well, especially with a lot of our young people thinking that there's not a lot of opportunities for them where they're going educational-wise, but sporting has always been something that keeps everyone engaged.
Just one last question for you. Could you tell us what you think might still be the barriers? Like, what do you still come up against that you want to change?
I guess I think from being from a migrant background, I think a lot of the barriers that I've overcome, but I still see a lot of young people overcoming, is the fact that we feel like, okay, then when your parent tells you, like, you know, there's no opportunities there for you, especially like my dad being like, okay, there's no point in you guys being signed up to play a sport on the weekends because there's no pathway. Or there's only one person to drive you around all the time and we don't have all the money to share around you. So educational-wise, I think for a lot of our community members, especially the elderlies, that's where the biggest barriers is actually coming from.
Can we have 100 more just like you?
I'll try and clone a few more of myself.
Please work on that. Steve, I want to come to you. Over the 7 years that you've been involved at Hoppers Crossing, the club has taken various initiatives, hasn't it, to help out the migrant community, correct?
Absolutely, and what Asha said, we see it firsthand. There is a South Sudanese, the Rumbek FC, I'm not sure if you know them.
Yeah, actually I know the boys down there.
Oh, well, there you go. So Boland and Latin, the guys, you know, they actually came to our club in pre-season probably 2 years ago, I think it was. And it was during, obviously, pre-seasons and trials, and we've got 3 pitches, 2 of them which we use for training and 1 main pitch. And what we found was that the guys would have their training for their tournament on the second pitch, and you know, we train on the synthetic one. And it was very separate, and you know, everyone knows each other. Well, everyone on this pitch knows each other. Everyone on this pitch knows each other, but they're throwing, you know, they're slanging each other, and like there was, I'm almost ashamed to say it, that there was almost like both groups hated each other. You can't be on our pitch, and yeah, and it was ridiculous. So we actually invited Rumbek FC to come and have a game against our trialists. And we actually picked up 2 of them. They played in our senior team last year, just quietly.
That's not fair, is it?
No, well, they weren't playing in FFV competition, so you know, they were playing in the community league that Ash was talking about. But there have been, it wasn't really something that we planned, so there was no method to what we were doing. We saw an opportunity, and especially for myself, I saw a lot of abuse getting thrown, and it was specific to the South Sudanese team, Rumbek, and there's also a Karenni team as well of Burmese kids, and the same thing, you know. With the South Sudanese team, Rumbek, it was mainly in the pre-season, so it was you know, it was daylight saving still. There was still, you know, daylight. In the middle of the year with the Karennis, it gets dark at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and they just get there for 15 minutes and leave, and we just had the idea, so we're not using the pitch, we turn the lights on. You know, it's as simple as that. What's it going to cost us? $20? Turn the lights on for them, and they go off and did what they want to do. It ended up happening that, you know, over the next 2 or 3 years, that community is really integrated into our club, and like some of the things that you spoke about that you had in your presentation about awareness. You know, they weren't aware. You know, there was an avenue for them to come and play, and you know, they've been welcomed across the whole club.
And there's been a few other things. Could you just perhaps express to the people here who might be at a club where they have the opportunity to do things like this? You also helped with balls, equipment,
yeah,
regos.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, you know, again, with the Karenni group, they turned up with, I think I played soccer with this ball 30 years ago. It was probably the same ball.
Lace-up one?
Couldn't tell it was that worn. But like year after year, we have our kits that we donate through Kevin Milstein Foundation, and they were just sitting there, and there you go. You know, here's some tops, there's some balls, there's some cones, there's some poles. We brought our portable goals out if they didn't have enough to play on a full pitch. They felt like they were part of our club. They never paid a registration fee. There was no My Football Club, none of that. They just wanted to go out there and have a kick, and we supported them as much as we could. One of the things that it's been 4 years and people are sick of me saying it, just let them play. You know, and I say that about anyone. Doesn't matter, multicultural, not. Doesn't matter what group. Let them play.
Just finally for you, what would you like to see councils do more of to help? Okay, can we have an abridged version of your list that you'd like to see from council?
Can I qualify this? Is there any council representation here, especially Wyndham? I heard Simon Crawford was coming. Is he here? No? Good. No, in all seriousness. Look, it's not so much... especially Simon from Wyndham Council have been great, and when we're talking about multiculturalism, they've run a diversity cup. We've had the honour of hosting the diversity cup. So from that side, it's great. When it comes to participation in general, the support's just not there. I've heard things like we don't want super clubs. That was a direct quote from someone, from a council representative. We don't want super clubs. We've got clubs in our area that it almost, I'm ashamed to say it, I've heard the term reverse racist. You know what I mean? And there's players that don't want to be associated to those clubs in our area. So we can fit 380 players. That's it. That's all we've got pitch space for. Off our own bat, we went to local clubs and asked if there was any room where we can have training nights, because Sunday's no problem, Saturday's no problem, but Monday to Friday, when we need lights and so forth, that's a problem. We don't have enough space. But no super clubs. We just need more facilities.
We've got a facilities panel coming up. You're going to love it.
I know.
Sam, just briefly, thank you for your quite comprehensive presentation. In listening to these two stories, do you find it just so heartwarming to see what a little effort, how far it can go?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited by the football and dancing bit. I had to restrain myself from giving Asha a business card saying, invite me to your next do. But the truth is, through both of the guys, we get a real sense of how real it is. And I think that's important for national sporting bodies and other state sporting organisations. These guys are at the coalface of trying to make sport more inclusive and welcoming, and it's a real challenge. And there really is a resource issue when it comes to things like facilities and a range of other key needs that sporting organisations have to get kids in particular on the field. And so I think it's really important that, this is not just a responsibility of sporting organisations, this is a social problem or a social challenge for all of us, whether you're in government, at local government, or whether you're a corporate or whether you're a sporting organisation. We've all got to be part of the solution. In my view, sport should be a universal right in the same way that education is, because in our society, it's actually not education, but it's sport that's the great leveller. It's the sport that gives you the path to opportunity. In our workplaces, if you haven't got a sporting context, you're not able to aspire to higher and bigger things in a professional sense and even in a social sense.
Indeed. Asha, if Sam turns up to one of your do's, can you make sure the dancing video gets on YouTube?
Oh, you better believe it.
Because we'd like a look at that.
Add to the collection, Asha, don't you worry.
Don't worry, I'll be joining you too.
Folks, we have a couple of minutes if anyone has a question for these completely inspirational people. Anne O'Donnell.
I was just laughing at Asha because I think we might have gone to the same Kenyan town and then had the same father.
I'm not surprised.
Only you could say that.
Asha, a question I wanted to talk about, because it was the same experience that I had. When you are a migrant, a lot of the focus for the kids is about education, and particularly with the girls, it's about getting an education. How do you talk to parents to allow their girls to get involved, and especially in soccer, and talking about the fact that it does actually open up pathways to greater education in the future?
I actually started with my parents. And starting with my parents being the oldest in the family, I kind of just copped all of that backlash, and it's just like, okay, I have to put all of my dreams or what I want to do aside just to make sure that I open a pathway for my two sisters who still got quite a bit of time ahead of them. And so what I started doing was I started telling my parents, like, okay, it's okay now that I took most of the burden on board. I went and got a career. I did something with myself. I think what you need to start doing is kind of seeing other options, you know, like, okay, it's okay to go to uni, get a degree and then get a job, but also you got to consider what they also want to do with themselves. And one of the things that I actually had to do for one of my friends recently was because he had to drop out of a course that he was doing and he didn't know how to explain that to his mum. It was tough because she was tough too. So I had to be twice as tough. And I had to kind of break it down to her and be like, look, you can't, because a lot of our parents too, they forget that they tend to put all of their expectations on you and kind of want to burden all their dreams on you as well. And it was kind of like I had to kind of encourage them or tell them a little bit to let go. It's okay to let go. And give them a little bit of free rein to be able to explore which direction they want to go, whether that is doing sport or travelling overseas for a little bit. And that's kind of been okay. And for my sisters as well, that's kind of been all right too, because it worked out that my sister's getting a year gap that I didn't get.
Very good.
Yeah. I hope that answered your question.
Another question to Asha. What is the first step that a community can take, particularly a rural community that has got a lot of refugee population, and the boys are all playing sport, all the Congolese, all the Sudanese, all the Afghanis and Iraqis, all boys playing. We never see the girls. What's the first step the community can take to draw those girls out to get them playing sport?
One of the strategies that we actually recently took was to actually invite the mums and the dads to the event and get them involved, give them a little bit of a role, and see, like, you know, it's okay, you don't have to be a part of the sport, or you can be, there's also other opportunities there for you to get involved. And I kind of build an awareness for them as well and be like, okay, then there are opportunities there for their girls and their boys as well to be able to take into the direction that they want to go to. One of the biggest challenges that I recently just had to go through is one of my cousins actually, and is a boy, unfortunately. Sorry. He had to travel overseas for the States, for basketball tryouts. And my auntie as well, being like a tough woman, did not want to let him go. And we had to battle her to be like, okay, we started getting her to come along to his tryouts, to his tournaments, and just to see how good he is, and there's potential, what the potential is, and the direction that he can go. And luckily enough, he's actually been in the States for the last 3 months doing his tryouts and looking to return in the next week also. So hopefully that has all been able to encourage other mums to let their kids and their daughters as well go into other directions.
Folks, if Asha Reech ever comes to you and asks for something, just give it to her, because it sounds like it's much quicker just to agree. One last question, Helen.
I just want to ask Steve, because we've had a few conversations about the challenges they had dealing with people from religious backgrounds, days of training, Ramadan, prayer rooms and things like that. What can the Federation do to support multicultural inclusion?
Yeah, you're right, we have spoken. One of the biggest challenges, especially with the Karenni group kids that we've got, they are highly religious. Christians go to church on Sundays, and their church isn't like, you know, my surname, Greek, you know, Greek Orthodox churches, I'll go for an hour on a Sunday if I go. They go for 6-7 hours on a Sunday, and they can't play on Sundays. You know, and you have to have very understanding parents that will let you know, the team manager create a roster to drive past the church, to pick them up, go to the game, get them ready, and then drop them back off at church. So It's just understanding that they do have some very strong religious beliefs. And it's not just the Crennies. There's a lot of people who go to church on a Sunday, and some people will prioritise church over football, and others prioritise football over church. And that's just one of the things that if we could play, say, our under-14 A's on a Saturday this year, then that problem goes away. All the kids will play rather than half of them playing.
You left out the group that football is the church. There's them as well.
This is true.
Lady, gentlemen, we do have to leave it there. Thank you so much. We could talk about this forever. Sam Almaliki, Asha Reech and Steve Lambrakakis, thank you so very much. Can I invite you to exit that way because I think we have a gift for you.